I think we're live. Okay, so welcome everyone to the 40th Core Dev Call. So today we don't have much to discuss. So first of all, if anyone has got any announcement to make. 3, 2, 1. Okay, no one. So we can jump to the first point in the agenda, which is a discussion about Waco 2 and what it means to be production ready and so on and so forth. So probably this point was made by Dean. If you would like to start, thank you.
Hey, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just quickly opening up the issue again. So there were like several discussions that we were having with Michael and Yuri was having with Michael, and I was having separately with Oscar, and so we thought it would make sense to quickly bring it into the core dev call to have a brief discussion on the current Stimbus integration with NIM Waku, what it means to be production ready for NIM Waku, how that integration with NIM status will look, and what that means for NIM desktop. So one of the main issues, for example, that we have is how we handle storage for these separate things, because I know that Michael was working on an SQLite integration for NIM status, which is using SQL Cipher. We're using a separate SQL integration for messages because we need that as well, how all that interaction looks with each other, I guess. And also, Michael had mentioned that Yuri mentioned that you guys won't be integrating NIM Waku v1 using the NIM client, but continue using the status Go client. So it might be good to hear from there what the rationale for that is.
Yeah, I think that's probably more an open issue than like a settled thing, but that was something that we wanted to discuss and kind of consider the different ramifications. I mean, in other words, we have a working v1 implementation in status Go that we're using, and so we didn't know if there was a lot to be gained from having both a v1 and v2 NIM implementation inside the library. Does that make sense? I don't know if anybody has any comments on that. Yuri may want to jump in.
Yeah, I think that was also like a miscommunication that we implemented the NIM Waku v1, and it's still there. But we got an impression you guys said, wait, you shouldn't have done that. You should have done v2 directly. But so that's the impression we got, which is mistaken. But it's not like we're saying, oh, we're only going with this version and that's it. Like it's not necessarily like that. Although it would be interesting to see how you guys envision this. Like if we support like both, how do you envision that working on the client? Like the person chooses which version to use. How do you picture that?
I mean, so for now, for early, for desktop, what we were thinking is you just run it with a experimental flag or something, and then you either get v1 or v2 based on that for very early experimentation of NIM Waku v2.
All right, and just another question though, maybe it's an obvious one, maybe not, is that is the version, it's v1 and the one in NIM Waku, and what's implemented in status Go, are they different protocol wise?
They both adhere to the spec from my understanding, so they shouldn't. If they do, I think we have another problem.
Okay, but so in that case, all right, okay. Yeah,
I can jump in and give a bit more context. So NIM Waku, it implements the spec, yes, but that's also a subset of what Status Go provides, specifically to the core app. So one reason for implementing NIM Waku v1 as a sort of stepping stone is because it reduces risks, and it makes it, it depends a bit specifically how you're using Status Go and where key management happens and how this bubbles up to the app. But just by switching to NIM Waku v1, it's not unlikely that some issues will sort of surface. Whether that's sort of using specific APIs that are integrated into Nimbaku, or something NIM specific, or something with the JSON RPC, how that works, or whatever. So the idea with that is that the code should be able to be structured in such a way that you can toggle between these two, and that would be a stepping stone. But it's also right that it's potentially a question of priorities. In that sense, it might make sense to go from status quo Vacu to Vacu v2 directly. Just being mindful that probably increases risk and so on. Regardless, I think it would probably be a good code structure if it allowed for having NIM Vacu v1, even if that's not actually pursued in terms of priorities.
I think that's quite doable. I mean, I don't think it's a huge hurdle to integrate NIM Waku v1. So, I mean, at the level you're saying.
Yeah. Also, our goal, or one of the goals at least, is to replace or port over status go. That would imply that the Waku part that's done in status go, it's actually NIM Waku v1. So if we want to port over and remain with compatibility, that would be we would use v1 anyway.
To date, sure.
Yeah.
And then just briefly, the point with Vacu v2 is that it would be useful, depending on bandwidth priorities in status NIM and desktop and so on, it would be useful to have all integration as early as possible, because that gives us feedback on the API, and we can make sure that we work on anything, sort of any rough edges and so on that are discovered. So that would be the argument for having some form of
experimental early integration. For example, this store issue in terms of where data is stored and so on.
Oh, the storage issue, it does feel to me like a separate issue, more like, I don't know, okay.
It would surface issues such as that, because by actually integrating early, we would find things. So that would be the argument for pushing NIM Vacu v2 earlier.
All right, and the storage issue, is there what are your thoughts on that?
So I was having a discussion last week with Michael where we were talking about storage of messages, and I feel like we probably both misunderstood what we were saying, where I was talking about the storage which is needed for the history protocol, and I think Michael was talking about the then already decoded payload storage for Waku messages that is queried for then displaying messages again in chat. Is that correct, Michael?
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's a bit of a mindset issue. I was very squarely in the mindset of NIM status's use case, so that makes sense.
Well, so here's the thing, right? Like, if you are in the mindset of NIM status's use case, that is useful for us as well, because then we know what is expected for us to be provided by NIM Waku, which right now sometimes is a bit of building in the dark, because we have the protocol done and the API for the protocol works. But what do you guys expect beyond that, right? So like persistence of messages, is that something you want us to do? Is that something you'll do yourself when you have decoded status payloads? Things like that,
I don't know if Yuri feels the same way, but I suspect that the plan is that we'd be doing that ourselves. I mean, that seems to be the current trajectory. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I think something Vitaly is assigned to that, or the initial work for that, and it's like the protocol is kind of abstracted, right? And the storage of messages is up to the client, not the client, but the library that's using the protocol. Protocol library, I should say.
Yeah. Okay.
I have one question.
Sorry.
So we were talking about integration often, but what does it mean? How do you define integration? What's a successful integration? Because I've got my idea of what's a successful integration, but we might not have all the same idea of what it means to have a successful integration.
I think the definition of done for us right now, or for the NIM Waku team, is that Waku V2 is integrated into status desktop under an experimental flag, and I can send and receive messages.
And when you say, okay, so this is a question that, like, because of obviously, like, my perspective is from the core team, so we're one step further. We're not in Steambus, we're not in Waku. And so now the question goes to Steambus, like, what does it mean for you, successful integration? Like, these messages, are we talking about raw messages, or we're talking about protocol messages?
Well, actually, we already have it working with raw messages, working on the accounts to get it, working for real in quotes. But for me, the done is integrated, is name status integrated, or Steambus, or integrated with both desktop and mobile, and working as it is, everything. With the flag or option to support the Waku V2.
Okay, it's the clarified. Thank you.
What's yours though? You agree with me? Like,
completely, essentially, like, I mean, like, the app should be no different from what it is now, effectively. Of course, we can cut some corners. Like, if there's going to be some performance hit, like minor performance hit at the beginning, because I mean, I know that we're going to breach probably messages, and so maybe whatever. We're not going to get all the benefits from Waku 2. That's fine. Of course, if there are major performance issues, that's going to be an issue. But easy with them, we're in agreement roughly.
So something I don't fully appreciate yet is where the bridge lives. Like, in which context are the V1 and V2 messages bridged? Is that on a per node basis? Does our fleet of mail servers handle that? I mean, I don't know, maybe the question didn't even make sense.
Wait, can you repeat that, Michael?
I mean, so I'm trying to understand better the context of where the Waku V1 and V2 bridge operates. I mean, in other words, suppose we successfully integrate Waku V2 under an experimental flag and desktop has been proposed. I mean, does that mean that V2 clients or V2 nodes will be able to exchange messages, but they wouldn't be able to see V1 messages?
So from my understanding, up until the bridge is running, that would be the case. From my understanding as well, any node can run a bridge. So any V2 node could run a bridge that bridges V1 messages to V2. Oscar can probably comment more on that, because I haven't actually looked that much into the bridge yet.
So the bridge is picked up, it's not implemented, but it would run as nodes in a cluster. It would work very similarly to how it works between
Waku V1 and Waku V2. So the Whisper and Waku V1. So the migration we did earlier this year, it would conceptually be very similar, with some extra operations that still have to be looked into in more detail. But yeah, essentially the same. So old clients would send messages on the Waku V1 as normal, and this will be picked up by some node in a cluster that they are connected to, and this node would run Waku V1 and Waku V2, and then there would be a shared sort of data structure, and it would make sure that messages are propagated to the V2 network, and likewise for incoming V2 messages, it would propagate to the V1 network for backwards compatibility, conceptually speaking.
So just to be clear, so if we didn't have the bridge up, and we had, say, 2 status desktop clients running on the V2 network, they would only see each other's messages, or other V2 nodes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we would have our isolated network.
Okay.
But I think that's also the goal, right? We want for beginning, for our definition of done for beginning purposes, I think we're fine with an isolated network.
Just going back a bit to the storage thing, so is it clear what the purposes of the existing SQLite integration is when it comes to history nodes?
I guess. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I guess my answer was going to be kind of shallow. I was going to say, I understand it to be for the purpose of history nodes, but not deeper than that. So if you need to elaborate for us.
No, I think that's fine. As long as we are we understand that that will essentially be 2 databases, and I think that's fine, specifically, especially since at least initially most of the nodes running that code will be nodes in a cluster or any other node that's just running in a sort of passive capacity. I think at some point it would make sense to merge them, but that would just be a table merge, so it shouldn't be a big issue. Just so it's clear in terms of mental model that these are 2 different things, at least initially.
It's cool.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I wonder in terms of security if it's relevant at all. Relevant in the sense that I know the messages being stored are raw anyway, but in the case of the SQLite database, the whole thing is encrypted. How would that work on the protocol level? Oh, you know what? Maybe this for another meeting, but I guess that's more like a technical detail. Sorry about. I was just curious about that part. Anyway.
I mean, if you. Sorry. No, I mean, probably, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not going to be very different from what Waku version 1 is. And so basically, history node will not need any encryption because it will only store encrypted messages or messages that otherwise were, if there's no encryption on Waku version 2, because I understand there's an option of not encrypted, the messages that anyone probably was going to have access to. So they're not confidential in any way other than the fact that you might be storing some messages that are of interest to you, but they're not going to have any confidential information that people will not be able to access otherwise. Yeah. While obviously, like application level messages are going to be stored on an encrypted database. Mind that when we talk about merging the 2, it's non-trivial to merge an encrypted database and a non-encrypted database. They require a migration essentially. So
I see.
But that's how it works with the current mail servers is that there's an option to use a different kind of database. You can use Postgres or you can use LevelDB, neither of which are encrypted. We don't use this SQLite Cypher. Okay. Anything else on this point? Oh, sorry. Go on, Oscar.
I wanted to make sure. Is it clear the differences with the API and so on, or are there any gotchas that have arisen there? Because it's a slightly different interaction with the sort of native NIM node API versus the previous ones. Yeah, I guess it's an open question. Because I don't know specifically how the status NIM code base is sort of using that or relaying that further to the core app as well. Like exactly what the plan is there.
I think Michael was starting to look at the V2 API when looking at chat examples, right, Michael?
That's right. For our what we called our smoke test for the basic integration, I just took the basic chat example and adapted it. It very clear from looking at the V2 versus V1 chat examples how the Waku V2 is a layered system, and you compose the things together, the filters and so on. So, I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time with it yet, but it's pretty clear from the examples how you work with it.
Okay, perfect.
I guess a general question then, are there any unknowns or blockers that it would be useful to resolve earlier rather than later? So that could be unknowns or things that are not clear.
It's probably unknowns at this point, and I'm sorry for that. It's just that we haven't spent most of our time thus far has not been spent on the Waku integration side. We've been working on some other aspects of the library, getting the database pieces and the CRUD pieces for the database in place. The SQL Cypher integration was a huge bear for the last, 6 weeks or something. So I think probably starting this week, we'll be looking more at the integration. Is that correct, Yuri?
Yeah, I mean, previously we had the one for the first Waku, and And there was a task for V2, which we looked at and to better understand how it works. So I wouldn't say it has not been looked at. It's more like we had to first solve the other issues to be able to proceed.
Okay.
Yeah, makes sense. Dean, do you have any other questions when it comes to what would be most prioritized to work on?
No, it seems to me that like the persistent storage thing that we were talking about, Oscar, about indexed store is not really relevant for NIM status. So that's probably not the highest up. I think what we want to look at is getting our cluster going and things more into that direction.
Hanno, do you want to do like a super brief overview of what you're working on and how that? Yeah, just so as an FI maybe. So I just put you on the spot. Just
Yeah, no, it's no worries. Hi everyone. I haven't met most of you, but yeah, I've just recently joined and I'm working on the non-NIM API. So many of these integration issues that you're talking about now will probably be relevant for me as well. So it's going to be sort of REST based, though for now, since secure HTTP servers aren't supported, it's just going to be a JSON RPC API kind of following REST principles. And yeah, so for non-NIM clients.
So this is an RPC API for Waku nodes.
Waku V2, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. Anything else that we would like to discuss on this point, or we should move on? Okay. So that was actually the last point. So there's a review of previous actions. I think the only action we had was for Roman to update with his findings about how to better optimize requests for wallet, and I believe that it's done that. So if anyone wants to take a look, I can just attach a link later on the issue. And okay, so that would be it. Has anyone anything that they would like to talk about? Anything? All right, so that's it for today. So thank you very much for taking the time to join the call and for the discussion. And yeah, have a good rest of the week. Bye.
Take care, guys.
Thanks.
Well,
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.